The specter of conflict is expanding across the Middle East. 2 weeks after Hamas's horrific October 7th attacks, the Israeli military has mobilized over 300,000 reservists, and we're being told they could move into the Gaza Strip any day. Now, I want to begin by introducing my guest for the evening, Iqbal Chand Malhotra, author and filmmaker who writes on geopolitics. Iqbal, welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Thank you, Sandeep.
What are you looking at, Iqbal? What does this look like to you? Post 9/11 or post 1991 Iraq war invasion of Kuwait?
Actually, it's neither. I think it's a very intriguing scenario where there's a larger game at play. And I think the puppeteers of that game reside in Beijing. And the game is about the IMEEC corridor, which is a very vital component of trade and commerce between, say, Japan and Europe. And it is going to be set up. It's already in the process of being set up. And it threatens China's dominance in the region. And it threatens the Belt and Road Initiative. And the Chinese had to destroy the IMEEC, which actually came about because of a rapprochement between the Israelis and the Saudis. And the first thing that they did was to try and discredit India by actually organizing the killing of Mr. Niger in Canada in June, and then the whole imbroglio that erupted when Mr. Trudeau tried to discredit India and claimed that India was responsible for the hit.
So you're saying that all these are interconnected? The
Absolutely.
Post-G20 meltdown that we saw with Canada, the attack, it's all aimed at the IMEEC.
The motive was to actually destroy IMEEC from being born. And also to destroy G20, because if Mr. Trudeau had actually spoken out in New Delhi against India, then there would have been no unanimous resolution, and IMEEC wouldn't have been born.
Of course.
But I think Mr. Biden steered Trudeau away from doing that, and Trudeau spoke out when he returned back to Canada. But that enabled IMEEC to be born, and then the Chinese had to go into their second gear, and which was the next country, and the target was Israel, because of the Haifa port, in which one of the corporates from this country has a very big interest in the container terminal. And the flow of traffic, rail traffic from Jebel Ali, say, or Al Fujairah, goes all the way to Haifa, and then from there the ships take over again, and the containers are loaded back on ships.
There's in fact just a small stretch of about 230 kilometers that remains to be built between Saudi Arabia and Israel.
In fact, the Arabs regard a lot of the land that is occupied by Israel, what they claim is occupied by Israel, to be Waqf lands, endowment lands, and that they want to get them back from the infidels.
In fact, we have got a beautiful map illustrating this IMEEC thing, and that last piece of the puzzle that was the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Israel is what's holding it up, and this would have been an alternative to
it would actually enable the goods. This is Jebel Ali over here, and it enables this rail corridor to go all the way up to Haifa. In fact, the old Hijaz railway that goes from Damascus down to Medina, in Saudi Arabia, part of that is on the same track. So you only had about 230 odd kilometers left to be laid of track, and then you land up straight at Haifa, where you transship back onto container ships, and you move on to Greece. Now in Greece, Piraeus is the most obvious choice, but 60% of Piraeus is now owned by the Chinese, and the COSCO shipping company owns it. So I think India was looking at one of the three other ports, so that the cargoes could be landed there and then move on the European rail network up to Germany.
Right up there, and it what cuts down about 40% of the time that it normally would take through the Red Sea.
And it also, there are two choke points here. Over here, the choke point is the Strait of Hormuz, and down here is the choke point is the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. If you can move the map up a little bit. Down at Bab el-Mandeb, which is near Djibouti. And Djibouti is an important base for the Americans, for the French and the Chinese. And of course, this entire area of Yemen, southern Yemen, is Houthi dominated. And this is the Houthis are non-state actors of the Iranians.
Working for the Iran. So there's a whole swath of countries, Iqbal, that have been left out of the IMEEC. There's Pakistan, there's Iran, of course, Iraq, And of course,
And
China,
Turkey.
it's an alternative.
No,
and of course,
Turkey,
Turkey, yes.
Because Turkey and Greece have a ongoing conflict over the Aegean Sea and
Yes.
the economic exploitation zone.
So-
and Turkey has said that any trade between Asia and Europe has to go through the natural land gateway of Turkey.
So that's interesting you should mention the IMEEC, because right now, even as we speak, there's a lot of interest. 2 weeks after the attacks, there have been the United States, President Biden has come out very strongly to say IMEEC is still on board. Prime Minister Modi has also said it's still on the, it's not on the back burner yet. This is what we feared. But the final piece of the puzzle, Iqbal, is the peace deal between Saudi and Israel. You think the kind of violence that we are seeing now in Gaza, the Israeli retaliation, is going to put this off the back burner? I mean, it makes it hard for.
Well, you see, in Saudi Arabia,
Mohammed,
Prince Salman has been going through a lot of liberalizations.
Yes.
And he's opening up the society. And I think he's coming into conflict with the clerics in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
But with the killing of Sunni Palestinians,
Right.
I don't think he's going to be able to do anything with Israel.
Yep.
So my view is that this is a very open game.
Right.
It's an open dynamic chessboard. Nobody knows who's going to join into the fight
Right.
tomorrow. So I don't think that this corridor is going to take off for quite some time, because even if the Israelis have to degrade Hamas,
right.
it's going to take at least 6 months to be able
couple
to
of
do
months, right? And there's a lot of people who are going to die in this. I mean, sadly, the death toll, the figures are over 5,000.
That's the most interesting thing, that why did Hamas stake everything on this whole hit, on this whole episode? Why did they murder Israeli civilians and children and kidnap others?
No, it was to inflict the kind of violence to provoke a reaction.
When the fact is that there's an old biblical axiom, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
Right.
Did they think the Israelis were going to sit tight? No. But obviously someone seduced them to act.
Right.
Someone who had a greater interest behind that and actually used Hamas as a sacrificial pawn.
Right. So that phrase is very interesting, what you mentioned, that you're looking at a dynamic chessboard that's at play in the Middle East. And the Middle East has always been a dynamic chessboard for, what, 2,000 years? But of late, even more so. And I think this the spell of peace that we saw in the last decade or so, especially post 2014, I think that lulled everyone into a false sense of complacency. But the Middle East, as you can say, very clearly see, is not a place that you can take for granted, and certainly not the kind of place that you could build large infrastructure projects. Though, I mean, we are hopeful of the IMEEC coming up, but like you say, that it's off the radar for now, it seems. But the major focus for Israel right now, Iqbal, remains Hamas. As you said, it boggles the mind why they did what they did. And right now, even as we speak, Israel, the IDF, they've begun this air-launched campaign of degrading Hamas's capabilities. There's a hunt for Hamas, as we're calling it. The leadership is under the scanner of the Israelis. And we have an interesting documentary on this we put together, which talks about this hunt for Hamas. Let's take a look.
In the early morning of October 7, 2023, the world woke up to the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust. Within 20 minutes, more than 3,000 missiles were fired at Israel, along with vehicle-transported incursions. With this, Hamas announced the start of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. In a series of coordinated attacks, militants breached the Gaza-Israel barrier, slaughtering civilians in the neighboring Israeli communities and attacking military bases, resulting in a death toll of over 1,300 Israelis, including women and children. Soon after the assault, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared a state of emergency for areas within 80 kilometers of the Gaza border and pledged that Israel will win by calling for mobilization of tens of thousands of army reservists. IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, launched Operation Swords of Iron to launch an invasion of Gaza. The goal was to rescue the hostages taken to Gaza and parallelly wipe out the top political and military hierarchy of the Hamas, the Palestinian group that controls Gaza.
Their main aim is only to finish the Hamas network. Initially, they will destroy the main lifeline of Hamas, that is the tunnel services. They are the tunnel, because once they destroy all these things, then it's very easy to make them not to operate in all these northern areas. then they will go behind the top leadership. Most probably, most of the Hamas leadership who have been mastermind of all these things might be escaped or might be in the different in the other parts of world.
To find out who is Hamas and who is not Hamas is difficult. And also the Hamas is melted in the population across there. The population is not anti-Hamas. 56 or 60% in last voting supported Hamas as an organization. To say that the population will give out information that this fellow is Hamas and you can come and kill him, that is not simple. So you can kill a leader or 2 leaders or 10 leaders, it may delay their functioning for some time. The efficiency may be lost for some time. But finally another fellow will be thrown up, and that fellow will take charge of the same situation and carry it out. How many people can you keep assassinating, saying that you kill leaders? It's not so simple proposition.
As of today, the IDF has successfully neutralized 2 of Hamas's top military leadership and is determined to go after all of them one by one, starting from Mahmoud al-Zahar, also known as al-Zahar, a Palestinian politician and co-founder of Hamas. Believed to be about 60 years old, Zahar was close to Hamas founder Ahmed Yassin and has also served as foreign minister in the Hamas-dominated Palestinian Authority government.
He created $1 billion from Qatari government, which were fed into Hamas carried in suitcases and notes inside Gaza. That money which allows the fighting to take place in Gaza comes from Qatar. And last 10 years, $1 billion has gone into, brought in by this leader which sits in there.
Yahya al-Sinwar, also known as Yahya Sinwar, he is being referred to as the face of evil. He is accused of masterminding the recent Hamas attack, which left 1,300 Israelis dead. He is the current Palestinian leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. It is al-Sinwar who co-founded the security apparatus of Hamas and is considered the second most powerful figure within the Hamas.
دعها سرا يا أبا إبراهيم دعها سرا ولتتحدث عن نفسها إذا حدثت.
Mohammed Daif Ibrahim Masri, or Mohammed Daif, often referred to as Al-Daif, the guest, is a one-eyed Palestinian militant and supreme military commander of the military wing of Hamas. He is believed to be one of the masterminds behind the audacious October 7 attack. At present, his whereabouts are unknown, though he is believed to be hiding in Gaza somewhere in the maze of tunnels and is currently on top of Israel's hit list. Abu Ubaidah, one of the most ferocious Islamist Palestinian terrorists, was the person who announced that Hamas was holding dozens of Israeli soldiers captive in safe places and tunnels in the Gaza Strip. Ubaidah's actual name is not known, and neither are most of his personal details. He always is seen wearing a kafaya over his face.
إن الموعد المحدد للتهدئة قد اقتربت نهايته وإننا لن نمدد هذه التهدئة.
Ismail Abdel Salem Ahmad Hanaya, also referred to as Ismail Hanaya, is a senior political leader of Hamas and is formerly one of the 2 disputed prime ministers of the Palestinian National Authority. He is also the chairman of the Hamas Political Bureau and is the main political leader of Hamas, living in Doha, Qatar. It is he who named the Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7 Operation Al-Aqsa Flood and pledged to continue the battle to liberate his land and his prisoners. Hanaya said that the Palestinian militant factions would press on with the operation in the West Bank and Jerusalem. It will be challenging for the Israelis to target Hanaya, as footage has emerged of him celebrating the attacks with other Hamas officials at his office in Doha.
أن يكون على رأس الحركة في غزة أخ مجاهد من أسرى الحرية.
When they announced that they are going for a war, that when and they already decided, they already discussed that what will be the scenario if they go for a war against Hamas. They already know that many organizations like Hezbollah, ISIS, and many other organizations like TTP will definitely try and support them. So they already have all these inputs. But for them right now is the Hamas elimination or the Hamas network elimination is the top priority.
Whether the world will witness assassinations of these Hamas leaders or not, this will become clear in the next few days. But for now, Israeli forces are determined to bring back its citizens as well as citizens of other nations stuck in Gaza.
My colleague, executive editor Aditya Kaul, put that report together. What does it look like, Aditya? Will the conflict spread?
Well, the conflict will spread, but there are various shades to it and aspects to it. One is, of course, the intelligence failure that we talk about.
Right.
Apart from that, of course, we are seeing the airstrikes that are continuing since last 2 weeks.
Yep.
But that's not it. Israel has been speaking about creating a new reality in Gaza on how the Middle East, how the world actually sees Gaza. And that means occupation to a limited number of days at least.
Right.
And that would require a ground assault, and that is being prepared. Israel has been preparing more than 160,000 troops and more than 360,000 reserve troops on the ground. We are seeing surgical level strikes that are being conducted on land as well, but that are on precise locations. They have assets on ground as well.
Right.
Because let's also remember that there are 222 hostages and some missing persons still that remain there. There are several dead bodies of Israeli citizens that are also in the custody of Hamas in Gaza. So it's a complicated situation as of now, even though diplomacy is underway for humanitarian aid, and there are three, at least 3 occasions where trucks have gone from the Rafah border from Gaza towards the Hamas areas for the civilians. India has also stepped up aid and sent in an Indian Air Force jet there. But now that the humanitarian aid has gone, will the civilians really evacuate that particular area, since the ground invasion will be beginning? That's the key.
Well, large number of civilians have already moved from the north to the south. I was reading reports about 700,000.
Actually, Hamas is a movement. It's not an organization only.
Right.
And all the Hamas members have families over there.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about a movement of Palestinians from the north to the south, the Hamas families are not going to move. They are going to sacrifice them to the bombardment.
Right.
And in fact, yesterday or day before, the Israelis had launched these repeated drone strikes. First, they send in their Heron drones that actually look at the grid of where the map, where the tunnels are, and then they send in their Hermes drones to actually bomb the tunnels. And they kill this Major General Jihad Maysoon, who was the man who actually masterminded this entire attack of October the 7th. So I think it's a very tricky issue, because civilians are going to be killed, and the idea is to obscure the killing of the Israelis with the killing of more and more Palestinians. I actually disagree. I don't think the Israelis are going to get into Gaza so fast. They're going to actually use their drones and other technology. They're going to use their surveillance, and they're going to be very certain, because actually getting into combat in an urban area is very difficult. You need lots of manpower and heavy casualties.
It just sucks in manpower.
And I don't think that the Israelis are quite prepared for that. I think this is part of the psychological war that they're waging by amassing their tanks there and keeping that option open.
Right. So in fact, Aditya did this explainer on Israel's intelligence apparatus, and this is again something, one big question that still boggles the mind is, how did Israel miss what happened on October 7th? As they say, terrorists have to get lucky once, governments have to get lucky every single time. Let's listen into that explainer from Aditya.
On October 7, Hamas led an unprecedented terror attack in southern Israel, killing over 1,400, most of whom were civilians. Over 212 hostages ever since remain in Hamas custody at an undisclosed location in Gaza. Israel has launched never-seen-before airstrikes in Gaza, killing over 5,000 people already. Let's look at Israel's premier intelligence agencies. The first and foremost, the known world over, is the Mossad, which is the foreign intelligence wing of Israel. The second is Amman, which is the military intelligence of the Israeli Defense Forces. And third, one of the most critical, is the Shin Bet, which is the internal security agency that looks at the human intelligence on a wider scope. Israel has several other smaller intelligence agencies like the Israeli Intelligence Corps and its Unit 8200, which collects signals intelligence. But these 3 agencies and their thousands of operatives form an iron triangle responsible for warning Israel of preemptive terror attacks. Conversation in the intelligence community globally has revolved around the unthinkable failure of these agencies, who couldn't preempt or provide strategic warning alerts. The attack was planned over a year ago. The massive preparation, training and transport of ammunition and other material should have attracted some attention. Even the Five Eyes Western intelligence agencies with close ties to Israel seem to have been completely missed the attack. They seem to have continuously focused on the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war and China's provocations. Now, Israel's intelligence gathering from Gaza primarily focuses on Shin Bet's human intelligence, that is, collecting human intelligence from the areas where Gaza really operates from the Hamas inside the Gaza. The collection and the analysis of the human intelligence as well as the SIGINT from Amman and military intelligence, which is signal or communication based intelligence using the latest technology. Now, on October 7th, all layers of this intelligence failed completely in warning in advance about the possibility of such large-scale attacks. Israel did receive intelligence of Hamas disguised as farmers taking photographs of border fencing around Gaza, as well as Hamas communication chatter about irregular military training and exercises to occupy the Israeli settlements. This intelligence data was collated and sent up the chain of command, but was disregarded as usual Hamas activities and not taken seriously. Now that Israel plans to launch a full-scale ground assault in Gaza, these are the people who are responsible for these attacks from the Hamas. This is the top leadership that we are talking about. The intelligence agencies in Israel are already preparing a target list of all Hamas top and middle-rung leaders in Gaza and elsewhere around the globe. Now, according to the Jerusalem Post, Shin Bet has established a new unit named Nili, an acronym in Hebrew that translates as "The eternity of Israel will not lie." This unit will be dedicated to hunting down and eliminating every individual who played a significant role in the massacre in the western Negev settlements 2 weeks ago. Even as Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has now promised to create a new reality in Gaza with a war against the Hamas, the intelligence agencies of Israel would contribute significantly to avenge the biggest massacre of Israeli citizens ever since the Holocaust.
Aditya, how did that alphabet soup of agencies in Israel, that formidable iron triangle that you mentioned, how did they miss what happened on the 7th of October? It's been 2 weeks, but we're still talking about how and why this happened.
Well, I think overconfidence to a great level. I think Israeli forces, the intelligence apparatus, thought that the deterrent had been there, and with the kind of technology, the ammunition and the manpower that Israel really has around the Gaza strip, it believed that the Hamas wasn't capable, and Hamas will not even dream of waging such kind of an attack in southern Israel. Apart from that, there were a lot of significant details that were missed. Hamas also used a lot of technology while launching these attacks. There were these sophisticated watchtowers that the IDF really had around the Gaza.
And they knocked those watchtowers off.
Knocked them off immediately in the early morning between 6:30 and 8 a.m. So the real-time information and visuals could not be relayed back to the command centers. Apart from that, there were balloons. Through these balloons, they monitor Gaza 24/7. But these balloons were out of service at least for 3 to 4 weeks because of the terrible weather conditions in that area. A lot of IDF troops who were in the front lines were on leave because of the celebrations and the festivities that were going on as well. And of course, Mossad, not so much Mossad, but Shin Bet and Amman were greatly involved in domestic issues.
Of course, the crisis,
the political crisis and other issues as well. And they were mostly serving the Prime Minister instead of the country over the last many months.
Iqbal, what's your take on this? You've been covering security for so many decades.
I think that,
what happened?
It was not a failure of Israeli intelligence as much as it was a failure of the political leadership to actually recognize the intelligence and act on it. And I think Netanyahu has been on a hot seat for quite some time with his attempts to change the constitution, curtail the powers of the Israeli Supreme Court. And he's been fighting a battle for survival, and this has given him a breather. But I think the Israelis, the intelligence knew about it, and I've read reports that they knew about it, but the politicians just didn't want to take heed of it.
So then it's not exactly an intelligence failure, it's possibly a policy failure. Then when you take a policy decision in your mind that, the terrorists are not going to strike, and so whatever intelligence flows in, you refuse to believe it.
But you see, your political leadership, when it's fighting a battle for survival, cannot think coherently. And look at all the permutations and combinations that are at play. And nobody's looking at the Chinese hand. behind all of this.
Yeah, as you so clearly pointed out, that IMEEC could have well been the thing. But there are a lot of people who stand to gain from this conflict and this, like you mentioned, the Chinese,
The
Turkey
Turks,
also,
the
of
Turks,
course, yeah,
the Iranians.
Iranians, and they are in fact directly involved, it seems, with
And the
Hezbollah.
Russians.
And
Don't forget the Russians.
there's so many actors, one loses, sight and count of this. But now, Aditya, the fight for survival that Netanyahu was fighting for survival before October 7th. There are opinion polls which say that Israelis, 80% of Israelis want him to own up responsibility for what happened on the 7th of October. Is it another battle for survival for him now? Is his political career over? You've been covering Israel very closely.
I think his political career is in doldrums. It's almost over, and I quite agree with what Iqbal really said, that it is a political mistake, it's a political blunder, and they will have to take up the responsibility.
Right.
There were a lot of intelligence, inputs that were given that we have found out. We have found out that there were, Hamas in disguise as farmers, clicking pictures continuously around the Gaza Strip to understand what exactly was going on there. There were reports of a lot of irregular training exercises that the Hamas military wing...
We saw those training videos of them exercising in full public view.
Yes, the Al-Quds was in fact preparing, and they were preparing to take over the Israeli settlements, and that was underway for months together. And this was sent in by Shin Bet and Amman up the chain of command, but this was completely disregarded as usual activity that the Hamas conducts, and there was nothing irregular or so certain about it that they were preparing something. So I think there was some kind of an intelligence failure, and they will have to look into it, because warning signs were given to an extent, but nothing was preempted that such kind of an attack could take place, or Hamas had the capability of conducting such an attack, but more so a political one. And someday, if not today, after the war is over,
yes, definitely,
the Prime Minister will have to take the responsibility.
And there is going to be a commission of inquiry, like there was one in 1973, the Agranat Commission, which went into the failings of the Yom Kippur War, and there is going to be one here, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be as damning as that. But it's going to be worse here, because civilian lives were lost in military. In war, you're okay if soldiers die, but not the way civilians were killed.
I want to give a very interesting statistic. The population of Delhi is about 18 million people, right? And the entire population of Israel is 9.3 million people, half the population of Delhi. So losing 2,000 people is like losing a lakh of people for us. It's that kind of gigantic loss.
In fact, that's what the Israeli minister mentioned to the Americans, that for or was it a military official? I remember, Aditya.
5 times 9/11.
5 times 9/11. It's like, it's the equivalent of America losing 25,000 people in 9/11, and that's the kind of scale of numbers that you're talking of. But Aditya, I want to take you up on what you mentioned in your explainer, the last half of it, which suggested that Israel is putting together a squad to go after Hamas. Tell us more about it. Is this post-Munich again?
Well, absolutely. We've known the Israelis and the Mossad in particular. These are legendary stories of how they went back, to the perpetrators, the criminals. Of course, the Nazi war criminals as well. And
they captured one alive.
Absolutely,
they captured
from Argentina.
Adolf Eichmann alive. They made him stand to trial. Yes, and they missed Mengele, but they got Eichmann. And in fact, there's this fascinating book that you should read on the subject by Ronin Bergman. In fact, it's the only authoritative account. It's called Rise and Kill First. And I was very interested to know that Israel is the only country that has carried out the maximum number of assassinations post the Second World War. And they've gone after their adversaries with a vengeance, starting from the 1950s. And it's the Americans who kind of borrowed this playbook after 9/11, using the drones and stuff like that. But tell us more about this policy,
so
Aditya.
they're known for this, and they're doing this again. I mean, even if they look inwards and introspect on the intelligence failure or the other failures that took place, but now the Shin Bet, which is like the domestic agency that looks at intelligence, mostly human, they are now preparing target list of not just people in Gaza who were responsible for the 7th October attacks, but people all across the world who may have some links with it. And this new agency under the Shin Bet is called NELI. And this NELI agency is looking, they have special forces from different wings of the IDF and the intelligence community, and they are stationed in different areas as well. and they've already started killings in Gaza.
Targeted killings of all the perpetrators.
Of these perpetrators, and this will continue. It's a long mission, it's
Right.
a long war and a long haul.
Right.
And certainly in the coming weeks and months,
Yeah.
or perhaps even years from now, we could see
Right.
that more killings of these people responsible
Right.
will take place.
Operation Wrath of God that they started after the Munich massacre of 1972, that lasted for almost a decade, if I remember correctly, from almost up to the late 70s. And there's been made very famous by that Spielberg movie Munich. So I think pretty much you could see the same happening over here. But meanwhile, Israel's capital Tel Aviv is under attack from both Hezbollah and Hamas rockets. And our colleague on the ground in Tel Aviv, Sumit Chaudhary, has this report. Let's listen into what he has to say.
First priority which every youth in this country is the forces. The reserve forces, people have been very enthused about this, because when I'm moving forward with the different locations, I have seen many people, local citizens, have been cooking food. They have been taking food stuff like mobile batteries, the wires, the chargers, the clothes for their reserve forces and for the Israeli forces. So there is a sense of involvement in whole country when this country is into the war. The army of Israeli forces are on the standby. They are not going inside. They are waiting for something, because I have been noticing them. Their armored vehicles, their shells, their surveillance equipment. They have plenty of backup with them, but still they are waiting for something, because I think they are making their northern borders more stronger, because if something comes from the northern borders, then they have a proper defensive and the offensive operations forces, so that they can handle both the fronts easily in this war scenario. They are waiting for their proper backups. Then only they will start doing something, and they're not going to enter and do a full-fledged war like Vietnam and like Afghanistan, which US have done. So they have been monitoring and understanding all these strategies. Their main aim is to clean sweep the Hamas military point of view as well, and the political point of view as well. So their main aim is to wipe out Hamas completely. For when their operation starts, then there will be no commanders, no leaders who can not only guide the local leaders and the soldiers on the militants on the ground, but they also want that there should be no a leader who can talk with the other alliance, so that they can mobilize their strategy, they can change their strategies as far as the Hamas is concerned.
So it's very interesting that Sumit says that Israelis are fully prepared for what will follow. Aditya, you've been there. Iqbal, you've been there. Tell us what kind of a society Israel is when war drums are beating, the enemy is at your doorstep. How do they react?
I think the society is more or so prepared. Last November, I remember traveling with the IDF to the Gaza border.
Right.
And I went to several of the kibbutz there. And we were speaking in detail with the local, men and women who've been staying there for years. And they actually showed us the entire drill. What really happens when the siren goes off, how they run with the kids, if they're in the playgrounds, outside on the roads or elsewhere. So they either go underground, and even next to the bus stop, on the main road, there is a shelter, a bomb shelter. So they go inside those bomb shelters, and in houses mostly, you may not find a bomb shelter. So you have a room which is secured as a bomb shelter, which has many coverings and many layers to it, and kids are put inside that shelter immediately. So the society is more so prepared. Even on main roads in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, in many other places, you will see these bomb shelters where people escape to. But in several occasions, there are 2 to 5 minute warnings that take place. So unfortunately, a lot of civilians get caught in this. I remember an Indian national, unfortunately, passing away 2 years ago in Tel Aviv during such attack. But unfortunately, Hamas, and more so Hezbollah, has many of these rockets that they are capable of launching.
Tens of thousands of rockets, and Hezbollah has what?
Hundreds of thousands.
I'm sorry?
Hundreds of
thousands.
They've got about
Exactly.
300,000 rockets.
Hezbollah has got multiples of hundreds of thousands.
I think the Israeli society is very plucky, and they have been facing an existential crisis since the foundation of the State of Israel. So I think there's no lack of pluck and there's no lack of courage over there.
Yes.
The question is that they've also got the support of the Americans. So it's a fight to the finish, and it depends again on who all joins the fight. What will happen tomorrow if some very trigger happy Hezbollah commander starts unleashing a barrage of rockets
Right.
on northern Israel.
Right.
So anything can happen then.
Yeah.
So it just depends. We don't know what the end game is.
Right.
I mean, the success has been achieved in installing the momentum of IMEEC.
Right.
Now, what is the next game, end game, that the puppeteers have in mind?
So who's the master puppeteer here? Is it China? Is it Iran? Or are they working in concert, you think? Or
Whose interest is it to destroy IMEEC? It's China.
yeah.
Whose interest is it to dominate the world as a single global power? It's China.
Right.
So I think you have to look east, northeast, rather
Right.
than anywhere else in the region.
Right. But you know, even as we speak, the Iranians have activated all their proxies across the region. Whether it's the Houthis have been firing missiles and drones towards Israel. Hezbollah has already been shelling, as Sumit just told us, they've been shelling, Tel Aviv. There are militias in Iraq that have been activated. American bases are being targeted. So what's the game plan? Is it to suck America into another conflict here?
Well, the game plan is to keep the pressure on.
Right.
And this is a political expression of militant Islam. It's an
Right.
expression of from the side of the Shias.
Yeah.
The Pakistan has already expressed itself from the side of the Sunnis.
Sunnis, exactly.
So the Houthis, the Hamas and Hezbollah are all non-state actors
Right.
who are controlled by Iran, funded by Iran,
Right.
and all the technology and the weapons and the armaments are provided by Iran.
Yeah.
So that's what the game is, the game of domination.
Right.
And
Using the 3 H's.
The three H's, the Houthis, Hezbollah and Hamas.
Houthis, Hezbollah and Hamas, and this is all seems to have been the plan all along. General Qasem Soleimani is the one who is supposed to have.
There are already Chinese troops
Yeah.
who moved in about 2 years ago into Iran to guard certain Chinese installations, and there was a agreement signed between China and Iran.
Right.
So you've got Iran, China, Russia, North Korea, Pakistan in one axis,
Right. Right.
and you've got the rest of the world on the other axis. So when you look at the world today, you're seeing a Cold War that started with the microchips in
Yes.
way back in 2000,
Yeah.
and then it's now advanced further as
Right.
trade and interaction and communications and electronics and everything else is piled in.
Yes. And even as we speak, there's the artillery shells that the United States was to give to Ukraine and
Yes.
being diverted to Israel. That clearly tells you that the theater of conflict seems to be moving away from Ukraine towards
Yes.
the Middle East, and who knows where it will be next. It's exactly like what you said, Iqbal.
It's a dynamic
The
chessboard.
dynamic chessboard. I mean, one can never take anything for granted, especially when you're talking about the Middle East, which is one of the most
I think no one can
volatile
make
regions
any
in the
safe
world.
bets or any predictions about what's going to happen,
Right.
because it's very difficult to assess that.
Right.
How far do the puppeteers want to go in pushing the envelope?
Yes.
And how willing are the people who are under pressure to fight and to extend their retaliation?
Iqbal, the Cold War 2.0 that you mentioned, that
Yes.
was the subject of our discussion a few shows ago. Describe to us what it's, what the chessboard looks like in Cold War 2.0. Is it exactly what we mentioned, or could there be a possibility of players moving across the chessboard and, crossing over?
Well, with this war in the Gaza Strip,
Yeah.
there are now 4 really hot flashpoints
Right.
around the world. The first is the Ukraine.
Yeah.
The second is the Middle East.
Right.
The third is the Ladakh border
Yeah.
that we have with the Chinese. And the fourth is Taiwan.
Yep.
Now, the whole interest in Taiwan is because the 13 factories of the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company
Yeah.
that produce 50% or more of the world's nano chips,
Right.
6 and 5 nanometers and above, have been prohibited by a bipartisan consensus from the United States in selling those chips to microchips to China.
Right.
Which is why they have been forced to seek alternatives, because without that they have had to slow down the rollout of their 5G program.
Yeah.
And since they're the factory of the world, they're dependent on these microchips.
Right.
Now the question is that will they be able to catch up with the technology of America? Doubtful in the short to medium term.
Right.
All the machines are made in Holland that manufacture these microchips.
The fab machines,
Yes.
yeah.
And the Chinese have moved their manufacturing of microchips now to Xinjiang,
Right.
because they have set up these 2 dams
Yeah.
on the Indus River, the Bunji Dam and the Dimer Basha Dam, at a phenomenal cost of $28 billion. And these dams are under completion, and they're going to generate 40 megawatt hours of electricity, which is already going to be pumped through the pylons and lines, electricity lines to Xinjiang, where there's an electricity shortage. And they have built or in the process of completing these massive, gigantic reservoirs, which are going to store the excess water because of glacial melt and global warming. That's going to happen for the next 30 years. So the action is all there in Xinjiang and in northern Ladakh, because that region and the waters of that region become very critical for the Chinese.
Because you need large amounts of fresh water to.
So the Chinese face that security threat or that opportunity. It's not really a security threat for them, it's a security threat for us, but an opportunity for them, which is why they are consolidating their forces in eastern Ladakh. They are not moving out of there, they are in fact digging in, they're building in infrastructure, and they're there for the long haul. And the same issue is there in Taiwan. So you've got Ukraine, Middle East, Ladakh and Taiwan. And I think we are now part of that alliance, or that unofficial alliance, or that unofficial grouping with the United States that's actually going to have to face up to this combined Chinese threat.
Aditya, do you believe this Ladakh was actually part of a larger game plan, as Iqbal seems to suggest, that it was never about territory but a larger geopolitical game that the Chinese have started playing?
I think it's always been so. I think the realization in New Delhi came in much later. Ever since 2012, I've been visiting Ladakh, particularly along, Chushul, where, of course, the India-China dialogue takes place at the military level, 19 rounds of which have already taken place without any major conclusion, and there are multiple sticking points that remain, including 5 in Depsang. So I think this has been the game plan, the Chinese dream that Xi Jinping had been speaking about since 2012, 2013, and these incursions have only increased manifold. It's probably only after Galwan that New Delhi had this realization and we had this shift in our China policy, which should have happened decades ago. Also the infrastructure build up to a great extent that we have been speaking about at News9 Plus. We've done multiple stories and documentaries about it, how India has really picked up, but still there needs to be much more that needs to be done. And I think Ladakh still remains a sticking point to a major extent. There's been no headway in that, and of course we'll see more incursions and more provocations coming in from Beijing on that.
But so China and Beijing is the single common factor in all of these 4 flashpoints that you mentioned.
Big swathe. And I think they've also supported the Russians in their invasion of Ukraine. In many ways, by getting the North Koreans to provide them with artillery, ammunition, shells, all of that, and helping the Russians to rejuvenate their armaments industry. So with the Russians playing second fiddle to the Chinese, you've got this entire arc of instability.
So the Middle East is going to be the focus of our attention for the next couple of weeks, judging from what we are seeing on the ground situation there, where the armies of Israel, the IDF, they're ringed around Gaza, ready to move in. There's an aerial bombardment underway. Superpower aircraft carriers and submarines have already entered the Mediterranean. It's a very, very dynamic chessboard, as Iqbal said. But with that, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me this evening. Thank you, Aditya. Thank you, Iqbal. We'll be tracking news and developments coming out of the Middle East on the News9 Plus show. Thanks for watching.